My mother, Maria, always said, life is a series of captured moments. I grew up believing this, my camera becoming the window through which I saw the world. As a photographer in Pittsburgh, I've spent countless hours chasing the perfect shot. Sunsets reflecting on the Allegheny, the industrial strength of the city standing timeless against its ever-evolving skyline, and the fleeting expressions on strangers' faces. It was in these small but profound moments that I found my purpose. But my life wasn't all sunsets and frames. Behind every perfectly captured moment lay shadows I couldn't erase. Maria raised me on her own after my father left when I was 5. I don't remember him, but the hole he left in our family was vast. My mother's love filled it the best she could. She worked tirelessly as a seamstress, sewing her love into every stitch of our lives. Her stories about our Italian roots, her laughter, and her constant reminder to value loyalty shaped me into the man I became. It was that loyalty that led me to uncover truths I wasn't ready to face. My story really began on the day I met Rachel. She was an art curator, a woman of fierce intelligence and piercing blue eyes. We connected instantly at a gallery event. My photos were on display, a series called Moments Unseen, which focused on the unnoticed beauty of urban life. Rachel admired one shot in particular, a crumpled flower lying on a bustling sidewalk. Even in death, it's beautiful, she said. We talked for hours that night, and before I knew it, she became my muse. We married 3 years later. It felt like the perfect union, two creative souls painting their shared world. Rachel supported me in ways no one else had. She pushed me to explore themes in my work I hadn't dared before, always challenging me to see beyond the lens. But like any photograph, what was clear on the surface didn't always reflect the full picture. The first cracks appeared when Rachel's gallery began hosting late-night events. She became secretive, texts she'd quickly hide, phone calls taken in hushed tones. I told myself I was imagining things. Rachel had always been independent, and I had no reason to doubt her. Until one night, I returned home early from a shoot to find the house eerily quiet. My instinct told me something was wrong. I walked upstairs, my heart pounding, and saw Rachel's phone glowing on the nightstand. The messages were still open. They were from someone named Damien. Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait to see you again. I stood there, frozen. The words blurred before my eyes, and my world cracked wide open. Rachel came home late that night. I confronted her immediately. At first, she denied everything, her eyes wide with shock and anger. But as the conversation unraveled, so did her lies. Damien, it turned out, was a new artist she had been working with. His work dark, provocative, and intensely personal. Their professional relationship had turned into something much more. I didn't mean for it to happen, Rachel cried. It was a mistake. Her words felt hollow. I wanted to believe her, but the trust we'd built felt shattered beyond repair. She promised to end it, and for a time, it seemed like she did. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Months passed, and I immersed myself in my work, trying to distract myself from the growing distance between us. Then one night I received an anonymous tip. It came in the form of an envelope slipped under my studio door. Inside were photographs, grainy but unmistakable. Rachel and Damien, arms wrapped around each other in a dimly lit bar. The date on the back was recent. Rage boiled inside me. I needed answers. I decided to follow Rachel the next evening when she said she had a work meeting. She drove across town to a small, unassuming motel. I waited outside, my camera in hand, until she emerged 2 hours later, Damien at her side. The confrontation that followed was explosive. Rachel didn't deny it this time. She confessed everything, her dissatisfaction, her struggles with my long hours, her inability to communicate her feelings. I was furious, devastated, but also filled with questions. How could the woman who had once inspired me now feel like a stranger? The days that followed were a blur. Rachel moved out, leaving me in the house we had built together. I drowned myself in work, hoping photography would help me make sense of the chaos. But life wasn't done with its surprises. Damien's body was found weeks later in a downtown alley, the victim of an apparent mugging. When the police came to question me, I was stunned. They had traced a threatening email sent to Damien's address back to my IP. The email was explicit, warning him to stay away from Rachel or face the consequences. I hadn't written it, but someone had. And they had used me as their scapegoat. The investigation spiraled quickly. Every detail of my life was laid bare. My strained marriage, the photos I'd taken of Rachel and Damien, even my mother's history, every piece of my life was scrutinized under a harsh, unforgiving light. Now, as I sit here in this small, dimly lit room, I recount the story to the detective across from me. My innocence feels like a fragile thread stretched thin between us. I've captured countless moments in my life, but this one feels like it's slipping out of my control. Who sent the email? Who killed Damien? And why did they want to frame me? The answers are out there, somewhere in the shadows of my life. And I'm determined to find them. I remember the day I first saw Sophie. She was sitting at a coffee shop, her brown hair cascading over her shoulders like a warm invitation. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity as she flipped through a book, and her smile was the kind that made you feel like you'd stumbled into something extraordinary just by being near her. I was there taking candid shots for a project, and she became my muse before I even knew her name. I approached her with a mix of nerves and confidence, my camera dangling around my neck. "Mind if I steal a picture?" I asked. She looked up, slightly startled, but then smiled. A smile that would come to mean everything to me and, eventually, my undoing. "Only if I get to see it," she replied. That's how it started. Just like that. Sophie grew up in a small Pennsylvania town. She told me stories of peeling wallpaper in her childhood home, nights spent listening to her parents argue over bills, and the cold sting of hunger she'd sworn never to feel again. There was a determination in her voice when she spoke about those days, a fierce resolve to never return to them. When she asked about my life, I told her about my passion for photography, how my mother's hard work had taught me to chase my dreams. Sophie listened, her head tilted slightly as if she were cataloging every detail for later use. At the time, I thought she cared. Now, I wonder if she was calculating, piecing together how I could fit into her plans, or if I could fit at all. For the first few months, Sophie and I were inseparable. She became the center of my world, and I loved how she seemed to love my work. She'd accompany me on shoots, offering her perspective, sometimes even becoming part of the frame. I thought we were a team, two souls chasing something greater together. But cracks began to show when I brought up my dream of opening a studio. "Alex," she said one evening, her tone soft but edged with steel, "you're incredibly talented, but do you think photography can really provide the life you deserve?" I didn't understand at first. She wasn't talking about passion or fulfillment. She was talking about money. Stability. She wanted guarantees in a world that offered none. I tried to reassure her. "It's not just about the money, Sophie. It's about doing something meaningful, something that lasts." Her response stung more than I care to admit. "Sometimes, chasing dreams keeps you running in circles. Maybe it's time to think about something more practical." Sophie found a job as an assistant to a real estate magnate in Pittsburgh. Overnight, her world seemed to change. Her clothes became more tailored, her demeanor sharper. She started spending long hours at work, attending dinners and events that were out of reach for someone like me. I felt us slipping apart, but every time I tried to bring it up, she'd brush it off. "You're overthinking, Alex," she'd say, kissing my cheek absent-mindedly. "I'm just trying to build a better future, for us." But it didn't feel like she was building something for us. It felt like she was building a ladder, and I was watching her climb it, rung by rung, while I stayed on the ground. The first real blow came when Sophie introduced me to her boss, Richard Langford, at a cocktail party. He was everything I wasn't: tall, polished, exuding wealth and power. Sophie hovered near him all evening, laughing at his jokes, hanging on his every word. When she looked at him, her eyes sparkled in a way I hadn't seen in months. After the party, I confronted her. "Do you even see me anymore?" I demanded. She looked genuinely surprised, but her answer felt rehearsed. "Alex, don't be ridiculous. I'm just doing what I have to do to make connections. This is for us." But it wasn't for us. It was for her. I could see it in the way she spoke about her job, The way she glowed when recounting her conversations with Richard, the way she started to dismiss my photography as a hobby instead of a career. My work no longer impressed her. It bored her. The night I found out the truth, I'd been working late in my studio. I came home to an empty apartment, Sophie's things scattered in her usual organized chaos. But there was an envelope on the kitchen counter, addressed to me. Inside were 2 tickets to an art gala, a place we'd dreamed of going together, but only one was used. Curiosity led me to open her laptop, which she'd left logged in on the kitchen table. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her emails, then stopped cold. There was a thread between Sophie and Richard. Words I could never unsee. I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore. I felt my world implode in that moment. Every shared laugh, every stolen kiss, every promise, it all felt like a lie. She came home late that night, her face flushed, her makeup slightly smudged. "Hey," she said, setting her purse down. "How was your day?" I didn't answer. I just held up the printout of the emails. Her face fell, but not with guilt. It was more like annoyance, as if I'd interrupted her plans. "Alex," she began, her tone exasperated, "it's not what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. That night, Sophie packed her things and left. She didn't apologize. She didn't even try to fight for us. As the door closed behind her, I sat on the couch, staring at the crumpled emails in my hand, wondering how I'd been so blind. Sophie was a storm, beautiful, powerful, and destructive. She swept into my life, turned it upside down, and left as quickly as she came. Now, I was left picking up the pieces, trying to understand where it all went wrong. But one thing was clear, Sophie didn't destroy me. She just taught me how to see the world differently, through a lens sharper than I'd ever used before. And maybe, just maybe, that was a picture worth capturing. I first heard about Max when Sophie came home late one night, humming a tune I didn't recognize. Her mood was unusually bright, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "How was the event?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She kissed me on the forehead and said, "It was fine. Met some interesting people." That was all. No details, no stories. Just interesting people. It wasn't like Sophie to be vague. She loved recounting every detail of her evenings. But I didn't press her. I didn't know then that the entire trajectory of my life was about to shift. Sophie became busier after that. Her schedule, which had already been packed with meetings, late dinners, and weekend events, became even more unpredictable. She started coming home later, leaving earlier, her phone always within reach but never explained. I tried to tell myself it was just her career taking off. "This is good for us," I kept thinking. "She's building something." I didn't realize she was building something with someone else. The first real clue came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was cleaning up the apartment when Sophie's phone buzzed on the counter. Normally, I wouldn't have looked, but the name on the screen stopped me cold. Maxell. The message preview read, "Thinking about you. Can't wait to see you again." My chest tightened. I stared at the screen until the notification disappeared, my mind racing. Who was Max? Why was he thinking about her? I tried to convince myself it could be innocent, but deep down, I knew better. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I started paying closer attention. Sophie was good at keeping secrets, but even she couldn't hide everything. I noticed her slipping into the bathroom with her phone to take calls, texting with a slight smile that wasn't meant for me, dressing up more often for work meetings. One night, she came home with a shopping bag from a high-end boutique. "Treating yourself?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She laughed it off. "A little reward for closing a big project," she said, twirling in her new dress. But Sophie had never been one to spend recklessly, not when we were still trying to save for our future. It didn't add up. I finally cracked when she left for a weekend retreat. She'd never mentioned it before, and the excuse felt flimsy. After she left, I decided to check her laptop again. It felt wrong, like a violation of trust, but I needed answers. What I found made my stomach turn. There were emails between Sophie and Max, long, flirty messages filled with inside jokes, plans for secret meetups, and even shared photos. She called him her rock, her future. My hands shook as I scrolled through their conversations. In one email, she wrote, Alex doesn't understand me the way you do. With you, I see everything I've ever wanted. The realization hit me like a freight train. Sophie wasn't just emotionally cheating, she was building a whole new life with Max. And I was the fool who'd been helping her keep it all together. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the dark, replaying every moment of our relationship in my head. Every laugh, every promise, every touch, was it all a lie? Or had I just been too blind to see the truth? By the time Sophie returned home, I'd made up my mind to confront her. She walked in Sunday evening, her suitcase in tow, looking every bit the picture of confidence. "How was the retreat?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Exhausting," she said, collapsing onto the couch. "But worth it." "Who's Max?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she composed herself. "Max? He's a colleague." "Why?" I held up my phone, the emails open on the screen. "Don't lie to me, Sophie." "I know." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she sighed, dropping her facade. "It's not what you think," she said, but her tone was flat, defeated. He's someone who can offer me the life I've always wanted. A life you can't give me." Her words were a knife to the gut. "The life you've always wanted?" I repeated, incredulous. "What about the life we were building? What about us?" She looked at me with something almost like pity. "Alex, you're a dreamer. And I admire that, I do. But dreams don't pay bills. They don't buy security." "He's stable. He's successful. He's everything I need." Her confession left me speechless. I wanted to scream, to beg, to make her see what she was throwing away. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Sophie had made up her mind, and there was no going back. I told her to leave. She packed her things that night, and by morning, she was gone. The apartment felt unbearably empty without her, but it also felt lighter, like a storm had finally passed. In the weeks that followed, I tried to pick up the pieces of my life. I threw myself into my photography, capturing the raw, unfiltered emotions that now filled my days. The betrayal, the anger, the heartbreak, they all found their way into my work, transforming my pain into something meaningful. I heard through mutual friends that Sophie and Max were moving fast. She'd moved into his luxury apartment in Philadelphia, and they were already planning trips to Europe, talking about the future she'd never wanted with me. It hurt, but it also reminded me that she was no longer my problem. Sophie was a master manipulator, a woman who knew how to get what she wanted at any cost. But in the end, she taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Some people aren't meant to stay in your life. They're meant to show you what you're capable of surviving. And survive, I did. Sophie's withdrawal was subtle at first. Missed texts, last-minute cancellations, and a growing distance I couldn't quite put my finger on. She'd tell me she was busy with work or too tired to meet up. I tried to believe her, convincing myself it was just a rough patch. But deep down, I knew something had changed. I just didn't want to face it. Her once warm gaze turned cold, her laughter at my jokes grew forced, and the moments of intimacy we once shared became rarer until they disappeared entirely. Every time I reached for her, it felt like she was already 1,000 miles away. The breaking point came one rainy Friday evening. I'd spent hours working on a new photo series, hoping to surprise her with it and rekindle something between us. When I called to see if she'd come over, her voice was distant. "Alex, I can't. I've got a lot going on," she said, her tone curt. "I just need to see you," I pleaded. "We need to talk." There was a long pause, then a sigh. "Fine. Tomorrow." I barely slept that night. I spent hours replaying our last few months together, trying to figure out where I went wrong. By the time the morning came, I was more determined than ever to fix things. When Sophie arrived, her demeanor was icy, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She didn't sit down. She didn't even take off her coat. "What's this about, Alex?" she asked, her voice flat, almost impatient. "What's this about?" I echoed, incredulous. "Sophie, you've been pulling away for weeks. You're not the same. I don't know what's going on, but I need to know." She hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting toward the door as if she were calculating the quickest way out. Then, with an air of detachment that made my stomach drop, she said, I need someone more stable, Alex. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. Stable? I repeated, my voice breaking. What does that even mean? I've been here for you, supporting you, loving you. What more do you want? It's not about what you've done, she replied, her tone clipped. It's about what you can't do. Your photography, your dreams, they're beautiful, Alex, but they're not enough. I need more. I need someone who can offer me a real future. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A real future? I said, my voice rising. We had a future. We were building one together. Or was that all just a lie? She didn't answer. She just stood there, her expression unreadable. I'm sorry, Alex, she said finally, but the words felt hollow, as if she'd rehearsed them. This isn't working. And with that, she turned and walked out, leaving me standing there with 1,000 words trapped in my throat. The days that followed were a blur of pain and anger. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything except Sophie's cold, calculated words. I wanted to hate her, but my heart wasn't ready to let go. Every memory of her felt like a blade, cutting deeper with each passing moment. But as the initial shock wore off, my sorrow began to harden into something else. Something darker. I started to replay every moment of our relationship, searching for clues I'd missed, signs of her betrayal. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Sophie hadn't just left me, she'd used me. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. My first step was finding out where she'd gone. It wasn't hard. Sophie wasn't as careful as she thought she was. Her social media was filled with subtle hints, a tagged location here, a photo there. She was with Max. Of course, she was with Max. I started digging into him, too. Max Lawrence, the golden boy of Philadelphia's tech scene. He'd just closed some major deal that was all over the business news. He had the money, the connections, the stability Sophie craved. But he didn't know her like I did. He didn't know what she was capable of. I began following them, not physically, not yet. I wasn't ready to cross that line. But I tracked them online, piecing together their lives through social media posts, news articles, and even work events. I started to see patterns, cracks in their seemingly perfect facade. One night, I stumbled across an article about Max's business deal. It mentioned a gala he'd be attending with his new girlfriend, Sophie Carter. The photo of them together made my blood boil. She was wearing the necklace I'd given her for her birthday, smiling up at him like he was her whole world. That was the moment I knew I couldn't sit back any longer. Sophie had destroyed my life, and now she was living hers like I never existed. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't. My obsession with revenge became all-consuming. I started plotting ways to expose her, to ruin her the way she'd ruined me. I considered contacting Max, telling him the truth about her, but that felt too simple, too clean. I wanted her to feel the same pain she'd inflicted on me. I started leaving anonymous notes at her door, messages designed to unsettle her. Things only I would know. At first, they were vague. You can't run forever. Then more pointed. Does Max know about your little secrets? I imagined her finding them, her confident smile fading as fear crept in. It was petty, yes, but it gave me a twisted sense of satisfaction. For the first time since she left, I felt like I had some control. But as my obsession deepened, I started to wonder if I was losing myself. Was this really about Sophie, or was it about me? Was I trying to hurt her, or was I just trying to fill the void she'd left behind? The lines blurred more with each passing day, but one thing remained clear. I wasn't done with Sophie. Not yet. When I found out Sophie was engaged to Max, it felt like the final insult. There she was, smiling in every post, parading around with the life she'd stolen from me. It wasn't just the betrayal anymore. It was the audacity, the way she erased our history like it never mattered. But it wasn't over. Not for me. She couldn't just move on without facing the consequences. I created a fake account to keep tabs on her. It wasn't difficult. Sophie had a habit of oversharing, her social media dripping with every detail of her perfect life. That's how I learned about the wedding. It was set to take place in the heart of Philadelphia, at some historic mansion drenched in old money elegance. The date was 3 months away, and the guest list was stacked with people from Max's world. She was about to become someone important. wealthy, respected, untouchable. Unless I stopped her. The idea came to me late one night as I stared at the folder on my computer labeled Sophie Memories. It was a collection of photos and videos from our time together, each one a painful reminder of what we'd lost, or what she'd thrown away. Among them was a private video, one Sophie had made for me during a particularly intimate moment. It wasn't something I ever intended to share, but now it felt like the perfect weapon. I started planning. I couldn't do this alone, so I needed an ally, someone who had access to the wedding venue. My answer came in the form of a man named Vince, the hall manager. I'd learned about him through a few discreet inquiries. Sophie, it seemed, had made no friends during the wedding preparations. She'd belittled Vince, dismissed his suggestions, and treated him like a servant. He was more than willing to hear me out when I approached him. "She's a nightmare," Vince said, his eyes narrowing as I laid out my plan. "I'd love to knock her down a peg." We struck a deal. Vince would handle the technical side of things, replacing the wedding slideshow with the video. I'd provide the file and cover for him if anything went wrong. It was risky, but revenge always is. The day of the wedding arrived, and I watched from the shadows as Sophie basked in the attention of her guests. She looked radiant, as she always did when the spotlight was on her. Max, oblivious to the truth, wore a proud smile that made me sick. I wondered how he'd look once he saw her for who she really was. As the reception reached its peak, the lights dimmed, and everyone gathered around the screen for what they thought would be a slideshow of Sophie and Max's love story. I slipped into a corner, my heart pounding as Vince gave me a subtle nod. The screen flickered to life, and for a moment, it was exactly what the guests expected: romantic photos of Sophie and Max, smiling and happy. But then the video changed. My video started playing. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone let out a shocked scream. On the screen, Sophie's private moment unfolded in vivid detail. Max's face twisted into confusion, then rage, as the reality of what he was seeing sank in. Sophie, frozen in horror, turned to the screen as if she could somehow stop it. "Turn it off," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Turn it off." But it was too late. The damage was done. Max stormed over to Sophie, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "Explain yourself." Sophie stammered, her confidence shattered. "It's not what it looks like," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I can explain." But there was no explanation that could save her. As the whispers and judgmental stares of the guests grew louder, Sophie panicked. She turned and bolted for the exit, her heels clattering against the polished marble floor. In her desperation to escape, she misstepped on the grand staircase. I watched as she fell, her body twisting unnaturally before landing with a sickening thud at the bottom. The room went silent, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on everyone. Sophie survived the fall, but barely. The doctors said she'd never walk again. Paralysis was her new reality, a cruel twist of fate that left her with nothing but time to dwell on what had happened. She blamed me, of course. But when the police investigated, they uncovered Vince's role in the incident. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. Vince cracked under pressure, admitting his part in the scheme and implicating me in the process. Max didn't just break off the engagement. He exposed Sophie publicly, revealing her lies and manipulations to everyone who had once admired her. She became a pariah, her social circle evaporating overnight. Whatever dreams she'd had of wealth and status were gone. I escaped arrest, but not without consequence. My name was dragged through the mud, my reputation as a photographer destroyed. Clients stopped calling, friends distanced themselves, and Pittsburgh became a city I could no longer call home. I left, packing up my life and driving away from everything I'd built. As the miles stretched between me and the wreckage I'd caused, I wondered if it was worth it. Sophie had paid the price for what she'd done, but so had I. Revenge doesn't heal wounds, it only deepens them. Now, I'm somewhere new, trying to rebuild, trying to figure out who I am without her shadow looming over me. Sophie may never forgive me, and I may never forgive myself, but at least the truth is out there. Sometimes, the only way to move forward is to burn everything down and start again.